Hello, it's Tessa, one of the news editors here at Manx Radio, back with you for another episode of Newscast. Today we're talking overcrowding at the Isle of Man prison and the introduction of temporary cells in portable cabins to help alleviate the pressure. And it's not just an island issue. It's believed more than 5,000 prisoners will be released early from prison in England and Wales as part of emergency measures to prevent collapse of the prison system there. Here on the island, Prison Governor Leroy Bonnick told Manx Radio whilst it's not something being considered here, he does have the authority to enforce executive release if required. I sat down with him to find out more.
My name's Leroy Bonnick. I'm the head of Prison and Probation Service of the Isle of Man.
Now, last week you told an inquest that the population at that point stood at 137,
Yes.
Capacity being 141.
That's correct.
What's the current tally? Where are we a few days later?
So this morning we unlocked at 135, but we also have 5 prisoners that are out on what we call release on temporary licence. These are low-risk prisoners that are working in the community and are waiting, probably one or two of them are waiting their parole outcome from going in front of the parole board.
And how much increased pressure does that put on the prison when the numbers are so high and when we're so near that capacity number? Does it put additional pressure on the operation of the prison?
Yes, it does. But having said that, we are, built to operate at 141, although, in my time in the service, it's very rare that you operate at your optimum. But having said that, we know just looking across the water there, what's happening across in the UK. Most prisons are at capacity and are looking at additional accommodation to cater for, the influx of prisoners coming through prison doors at the moment.
And the temporary accommodation and the temporary options are something that the Isle of Man has looked into, and we know that we've got these temporary cells which have been created. When will they become operational?
We have electricity into them now and everything else, but there are key factors before they can be occupied, such as an alarm system, a general alarm, CCTV, and most of all the fire system that prior to me arriving here today were being tested. And then from there we'll look at a search, because when you've had that many people in a particular area from outside the prison, it has to be searched by our security team to say that it's habitable and prisoners can obviously safely go in there. But we're working towards that in terms of where we need to be in terms of fully occupying that building.
And we've obviously had an incredibly wet weekend, and we know that they are sort of these portable cabins, if you like. How did they cope with the weather that we've had over the weekend?
No problem at all. I mean, we did some research into this, and I think I mentioned earlier in the conversation that the UK are going through, similar issues with population pressures. So, we did some research, and these are tried and tested in some of the prisons across through the Ministry of Justice in terms of, capability of holding, prisoners. I mean, we're talking low-level prisoners here that, ultimately what we're looking at that will be occupying these this accommodation, will go out to work for most of the day, and probably the most of the time they're spending there is weekends. And we're talking low-level risk prisoners that need little supervision or none at all. What
happens if we hit that capacity and the new cells aren't ready?
Well, I'd like to think we don't, but you've always got to plan for the worst. I do have, the authority as a governor to obviously enforce what we call executive release. And again, prisoners with, less than 28 days left to serve, they would be suitably risk assessed. But I'll quickly add that does not apply to violent offenders. Sex offenders would not meet that criteria in terms of being eligible to be considered. And I say, that's a key word, being considered. There's a rigorous risk assessment that goes out that these people can safely be reintroduced back into the community. Now, in recent times we have released one or two, and we're talking 8-10 days left in their sentence to serve. In terms of that, I've not got to the situation where I've had to release somebody who still had 28 days remaining on their sentence. They're low. We're talking weeks rather than,
Obviously, since the general election in the UK, we've actually seen that seems to be the way that the UK may look to go, because we know that their prisons are over capacity as well. You've mentioned there that obviously it would only be considered where there's a very short term left to run. Would it ever be an option to release prisoners with more time left? And have you had to have those conversations yet about what could happen further down the line if the population just continues to increase?
I mean, no, we haven't had those sort of conversations. That was just, coincidentally alongside us having, the additional accommodation. I think, as I said earlier, we've explored this through the Ministry of Justice, and I know they would have put higher category prisoners in some of these accommodations, in some of the HMP prisons that I've actually explored where they were housing these sort of prison in this sort of accommodation. So, no, in answer to your question, it's not something that we're looking to do. We're hoping that certainly in terms of the accommodation coming on stream and, the way the courts are operating and what we do, we project who's due for release and discharges in the coming weeks, months, 6 months period and try and obviously stay ahead of the game in terms of managing the population pressures.
Obviously at the prison at the moment, all of the cells are single occupancy.
That's correct.
Why can't they be adapted into double occupancy to give us that extra capacity?
Because there's a certain amount of space that is required for an individual to live, in a cell, and we can't meet that specification with the size of our cells, and they're only for, single occupancy. Short term, if, somebody has to buddy up in terms of supporting another prisoner, that's fine. But, long term, you need 2 beds, bunk beds. They'd have to have furniture to store their clothing and such like. So, the way the cells have been designed, I don't know what the exact specification is, but it has to be a certain size for it to be doubled up, and we don't meet that specification.
There's been a lot of criticism from different areas of society about the kind of push for the population growth that government wants to see. That's obviously despite the feeling from many people that the island's current infrastructure is creaking and that maybe the services can't quite cope. Do we actually need to build a bigger prison? In
answer to your question, we're talking about wanting to increase the Isle of Man population to 100,000. Now that would, you talk about the infrastructure, schools, hospitals, everything else that comes with that. And unfortunately, prisons are part of the community. So in answer to your question, we would need to consider that or factor that in long term if the population would increase to the 100,000 that we're looking to hit that target.
And have any conversations been had about how Derby could actually be redeveloped permanently? Have any conversations been had about perhaps building an extra wing or...
Most definitely. Those conversations have been had because the temporary accommodation is exactly that. But we have to look at long term in terms of future proofing, in terms of a prison and, the population increasing. And unfortunately, you do get some bad eggs in terms of any population that's increased. So, we have to future-proof and look at the prison in that aspect, and that is conversations that I've had, with my chief officer.
There was some videos that were published by the Department of Home Affairs last week about the temporary cells. And in one of them, the Justice and Home Affairs Minister said that it was virtually impossible to do any meaningful rehabilitation work with people who were sentenced to custodial sentences of 12 months or less. Why is that?
You usually get prisoners going up to about 4 years in terms of sentences on average, and within a year, by the time you've done the assessments and obviously waiting time to get onto a course in terms of addressing some of your reoffending work, it's just not long enough. There's a short time work, but these things take time. When you've got people with 4 years or over, you've got a captive audience where you can plan, do the certain risk assessments, there's psychiatric reports, mental health, and all of that takes time, especially with a rising population, and they have to be assessed, their suitability to go on to those particular courses.
Is there not a risk, though, that if we don't sort of work on that rehabilitation angle, then somebody who maybe comes in for a shorter sentence might be actually more likely to reoffend when they go back into the community and then end up in that sort of revolving cycle of just coming back through your door?
I've no doubt on that, but, we are looking and researching that with our forensic psychologist team and certainly the probation team in terms of what we can do in the short term at least, and whether some of this work is able to continue once they've gone back into the community, if people want to engage in that. So it's not something we've just put on the back burner and we won't bother with you because you've got, we need to look at the reasons why you came into custody in the first place. And everybody goes through that initial assessment, but you look at those long term and the plan for those. But it is something that's highlighted that we need to. But that's, an all criminal approach in terms of the people getting sentenced. And is there an alternative to custody in terms of coming into prison that we could actually, serve to the individual that, one, they don't lose their home, they don't lose their job, and then they're not dependent then on, the island as a whole in terms of, the taxpayer's purse.
Because obviously when someone does go into custody, they likely lose a lot of the protective factors that they would have in the community. So actually it almost becomes a double-edged sword in some cases, I guess. And
those are the key factors, as you've pointed out, that actually goes quite a long way to obviously helping people to, stop reoffending. Those are key factors.
It's around about a 66% increase in population. Yeah. I mean, as the prison governor, does that concern you that it's that high? We know that some of that has come from the big focus on the drugs and the drugs cases. You're the prison governor, 66%. Does that ring alarm bells to you?
Ultimately, but, we've a new chief constable in his, plan to keep the island safe. So, and I know a lot of that increase was as a result of the Operation Nightjar. So, we had, planned for it. We were aware, what was on the horizon. So we can plan so much and look at our population and plan ahead. As I said earlier, we do currently forecast in terms of people coming to the end of the sentences, what's happening in the courts. I know sentences usually Tuesdays or Thursdays, but business as usual within the courts. On any given day, we could have a couple of receptions. So we do try and look ahead and plan, but you can never, have 100%, calculation on what's going to happen tomorrow.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.